One of the most talked about things in Jewish genealogy is the idea of somebody moving to another country and then changing their last name. And you've probably heard a million times somebody say something like, oh, my family had their last name changed at Ellis Island. And that is complete nonsense. People's family names were not changed at Ellis Island. What usually happened is that they sailed to the country they were going to, let's say the US, with their original Jewish name. So if someone's name was Yankel Rosenblatt in Lithuania, then on their ship manifests, it's most likely going to say Yankel Rosenblatt. But for one reason or another, you'll see a lot of Jews who change their last name after immigrating to the United States. I'm Yona Paley, and I believe genealogy is fun. And on today's episode, I'm going to teach you about the 5 most common types of surname changes and what they mean, so that you can try to pick up on the patterns of a potential ancestor or cousin of yours who may have changed their name after coming to the United States. Reason number 1 is shortening a name to simplify it. And this is probably the most common type of last name change that you'll see. And what it is a lot of traditional European Jewish surnames are very long and complicated to pronounce. So people might lop off a chunk of that name just to make it easier to pronounce. Some really common examples of this is someone who has a last name like Katzovitz and they changed it to Katz, or they might have had the last name Levinsky and they changed it to Levin. And this can be a little bit confusing because a lot of the times the name that they're shortening it to is a surname in and of itself. So in Europe, you would have had a lot of people with last names like Levinson or Levinsky, but you also have people with the last name Levin. And the same, you will have a lot of people with the last name like Katzovitz. But there are also people with the last name Katz. So they're still keeping a Jewish version of the name. And in some cases, it's even a name that is a name that people had in the old country. So this can be a little bit tricky when you're looking through old records, when you're trying to find somebody and you find that their last name on their gravestone is Levin. Well, you don't know for sure if that person's last name is Levin or Levinson or Levinsky or some other variation of Levin, because there's a chance that they might have shortened it just to make it easier to pronounce. The second type of surname change is anglicizing a very Jewish sounding name to something that sounds a lot more Western. You have this a lot with given names, like people changing their name from Moshe to Morris, but it also happened with last names. So if somebody had the last name, for instance, Kirschenbaum, they might have changed it to something like Cooper, which kind of starts with the same intonation, like a k sound, but they made it something very common in the Western world just because they didn't think people would want to pronounce something like Kirschenbaum, or maybe it was difficult to spell. An example of this is actually my own family, my Mielnicki or Mielnicki family from Poland. When they came to the United States afterwards, they changed their last name to Minnick. So from Mielnicki to Minnick. Now the third type of surname change is where they translate something from another language, let's say Yiddish, German, or Hungarian, into a an English version of that name. So an example of this would be changing something like Zalmanovich to Solomon, and you also get it very frequently with last names that are colors. So something like Braun might be changed to Brown, or Grunstein would be changed to Green or Greenstein. So this is basically just taking a last name that means something in another language and translating it into a more palatable Western term. The fourth and fifth reasons are the least common, but I've seen them happen before. So I'm going to give you some examples of them so that you can try to understand just how difficult it can be sometimes to find family members. Category number 4 is what I like to call the generic Jewish last name. So what this is where somebody will have a very peculiar or difficult to pronounce last name, and then they'll pick still a Jewish name, but one that's easier to pronounce, but completely unrelated. So an example is a lot of people will change it to something like Cohen, because Cohen's a very generic name. I have a branch of my family that had the last name Uzvalk. And when they came to the United States, they changed their last name from Uzvalk to Cohen. And it's completely non-intuitive. You would never have really known that they did this change until you can find some documents to back it up. And a lot of times this will be a death certificate where they'll list the original surname as the father's last name. It can also be something as simple as family knowledge that's been passed down through generations. And in the best case scenario, you get an actual naturalization document that explicitly tells you what the original name was and what it was changed to. So those are some of the ways to figure out a name change like this. And moving on to reason number 5, which is related but not exactly the same, you have probably the least common type of name change. And just so you know, I've kind of ordered this list from most common to least common, with not changing your name at all being the most common. I would say in majority of cases, the name actually stays pretty much the same. But as for people who change their last name, I have ordered this from the most likely to happen to the least likely to happen. So reason number 5, the least likely type of name change, involves somebody taking a very Jewish sounding last name and changing it to something unrelated that's non-Jewish. And a lot of times people will do this because they want to basically just adapt to the local culture, and they don't want to maintain any semblance of their Jewish name or anything. So an example of this would be if somebody had the last name Aronofsky and they changed their last name to Smith. You know, it's something that's unrelated, and it's not even giving any indication to anybody that they have some Jewish heritage. Remember that a lot of people who were coming to the US between the 1880s and 1920s, they were fleeing pogroms, they were fleeing oppression, and some of them just didn't want anyone to know that they were Jewish, or they just picked up on something. They realized that it might be easier for them to get jobs or to settle down in a community if they didn't keep their Jewish sounding last name. So this is the reason oftentimes for a name change like this. It's not super common, but it absolutely does happen. So there you go. The next time you're researching your family and you may have trouble figuring out whether they might have changed their last name, those are 5 types of name changes that you may encounter. And remember, their last name was not changed at Ellis Island. It wasn't changed on this ship. What did happen very frequently was somebody, for whatever reason, changed their last name to make it more easy to pronounce, to settle down into a more Western culture, or for any number of other reasons. I hope this video helped you. If you liked it, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the YouTube channel. As always, I'm looking forward to bringing you more videos about famous Jews, as well as tips and tricks that you can use in your own genealogy research. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll get you next time.